Welcome to Three, a show about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and part of the Tennis Channel podcast network. I'm Gil Gross with Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy. Novak Djokovic, his incredible run going for the Grand Slam does not end in a triumph in the U.S. Open final. Daniil Medvedev beats him 6-4, 6-4, 6-4. And this is our raw reaction right after the match, as we like to do after these majors. This was emotional for both players. We saw someone win their first major. We saw someone basically lose this chase for history in the very, very last moment. Things going on with the crowd. Amy, what are you feeling right now?
That tennis can do this sometimes, and that sports never really stick to script. And that's why they're enjoyable and compelling, because anything can happen. And my overwhelming feeling after seeing Novak at the end of the match and how he reacted is that if you are a fan of someone and you love that person and you support that person, then you still love them after something like this, because you love the person that they are, not a result or an accomplishment. So if you're a fan of his, like I am, you're just going to keep on supporting him the same as you always did.
That is very, very thoughtful. And I think, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, first, we all know about the whole thing of sports is the unscripted and the surprise. And it's one of the few things, sports is one of the few things where surprise isn't bad for you. In most parts of life, surprise isn't so good. And so sports is a good way to see it. And we'll get into Medvedev a little bit, but from the Djokovic standpoint, obviously crushing, and you could see how much it meant to him. And he fought the good fight. And this doesn't diminish his greatness, his A-plus stature on the tennis, pantheon. And you see how fit he is and how hungry he is, and he's going to be playing for several more years. Though this was a neat chance. It's not often when you get to win the first three and then come into the finals. But tennis-wise, well, we'll dig into it a little bit more again. But it was nice. It was also nice to see the whole a crowd gathered in the U.S. Open. The whole tournament had that aspect of gratitude. You were front and center for most of the tournament, Gil. So maybe you can share that and talk about the whole end of the tournament today.
Well, I think that was one of the reasons. The crowd was one of the reasons why I almost feel a sense of, there's that saying, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. Who said that? I should really know who said that.
Wait, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened? Is that right? I never
heard
that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, really? I think it might be like Albert Einstein. I shouldn't guess, because then I'm going to sound like a fool.
Tell us in the comments if you know. Somebody in the comments will know.
You got to learn this. There's a saying that also goes that amateurs borrow, professionals steal. So Gil Gross said it.
Yeah. There you go. That's kind of how I feel, first of all, about the run, because think about how many memories and, when this starts to come to a close, you think back to Australia and the oblique injury. And then you think about Roland Garros and the coming back from 2-0 down. And then you think about Wimbledon and getting through all of those pressures. And then I found it rather remarkable that he even just continued to handle the pressure and make the final here at the US Open, even though the expectations were that he would accomplish it. For me, it was not a given based on the immense amount of pressure and having to go through a player like Zverev in the semifinals and Berrettini to a slightly lesser extent in the quarters. What a run this was. And I think at the end, for there to be this kind of, I don't know if I want to call it like a making peace between Novak and the New York crowd, and that happening mutually, there was a lot there that was kind of like, yeah, Djokovic just lost a chance at the Grand Slam, but it almost feels like a peaceful ending.
Well, it's interesting how players, they age and people become more appreciative of them. It's like Billie Jean King said once, they love you when you start, they hate you when you're winning, and they love you again at the end. That was Billie Jean King. That's a quote.
You didn't say that? I thought that was Joel Drucker.
Thank you. Yeah, right. I never had any of those. So they and I think with Novak, yeah, I think we knew this whole tournament that the crowd was going to be a little more for him. Nadal and Federer aren't here, so he's the enduring of the three. He was trying to do something spectacular and a chance to appreciate him at 34 as he's winning these big titles. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see when he comes back next year. And I think in this case, in the tennis, he logged in a lot more court time prior to this match than Medvedev.
Well, just if I could, going back to the crowd before we get into the tennis, and I was in the crowd a few times and got to really experience it. It was fantastic. But at the start of the tournament, they were against him, and we got some comments on Twitter saying, Gil, I thought you said that the crowd was going to be in his favor because they wanted to see history. Well, what happened is with each match, it turned a little bit more toward him. And, you know, the second match he played, they were still against him, although not as vehemently. And then I was there for the Berrettini match, and I was like, this is like just about 50-50, you know,
Agreed.
in terms of the support. And then tonight, fast forward, he had the crowd on his side. And that's kind of the irony, because there have been all these think pieces that have been written about unloved Novak, which I'm not really sure I even agree with that premise. But he finally got the crowd in his favor, and this was the one he lost. So there is a little bit of a twist there, but you know what? The story is unwritten, because this is not his last US Open, and we'll see what happens next.
Some will say probably, and I don't agree with this, but I imagine some people feel that Novak would have been better off if the crowd was rooting against him. Maybe it would have distracted him and given him something else to think about, but I just don't agree with that.
Silly. That's just that. I mean, I think all that stuff is silly talk. The crowd, what the crowd is going to be playing better when it's for him, was playing against him. I mean, I know crowds have their influence on how people go about playing a sport, and particularly something like tennis, which is individual and it's weighing. I don't think that matters. I think, and we're going to get to this shortly, I think it's about who you're playing to. It's about who you're playing, and the ball and the legs and the nerves and all that stuff that just kind of plays into it. I don't think, you know, against four, I mean, in the very first match, he had a pronunciation challenge where in his first round match, Rune is confused with booing. So Rune, boo, and this energy. I think you talked about that in the very first day of the first Novak match of the tournament, Amy, that the crowd wanted some good tennis. It wasn't like they were necessarily purely antagonistic. I didn't realize that you thought the crowd was about 50-50 versus Berrettini. Since I wasn't there, I couldn't quite gauge it. That's interesting. I would have thought it would have been more for Novak, but whatever. And here comes the final. Yeah.
Well, okay. The crowd was one of the themes that we hit on when we previewed this tournament. Another thing that we discussed at length was the pressures. And it seemed to me, we will get to Medvedev because Joel, you know, obviously you're right. I mean, Medvedev was ultimately the undoing here, but I think the pressure was also right up there. And in this match, for me, Djokovic looked tight and he looked tired. And those things generally visually can start to blend together and look very similar. But what was the end result here was, I think it was too much pressure for Novak on this day, just like it was too much pressure for Serena when she was in the same position. And that is human. And that is why, you know, we don't make predictions on three, but I make predictions on Monday Match Analysis. I picked Medvedev over Novak because I'm just like, I don't think any human can withstand this. And I think that is kind of what happened.
Well, that's interesting. You know, this whole thing around pressure in sports is so interesting. I mean, it's like, then we hear, like Novak was talking about the Olympics and the privilege of pressure, and you want it, and it's real because you feel it, because you get nervous. And then if you're tired, that doesn't help. And he probably was maybe a little a little tired and the way pressure feeds into it. But it's one of those things you could see Novak doing. He's done so much work on himself, on his psyche, on his body. So what do we mean by pressure? What's that? How do we channel it? And in some ways we're all human. And in some ways these people are incredible performers. So yeah, and Medvedev had the pressure of trying to win the slam and trying to beat this incredible player. So yeah, pressure this way, pressure that way. It's always fun. It's like, oh, the pressure's on them because I don't have anything to prove. I have nothing to lose. All this language. It sometimes just cracks me up. It's like pressure. It's like a big little balloon that we want to bat to the other person. I don't feel any. The pressure's on them. They're expected to win. I don't know.
Well, I thought that fatigue was really more of a tangible factor here because Chris Fowler, the ESPN broadcaster at the start of the US telecast, said that Novak had spent 5.5 hours more on court this tournament than Medvedev. I mean, that's very real, right? And I thought watching the final that it took a 1-2 punch to beat Novak. It was actually two players. It was Zverev and Medvedev. And that if Zverev had played Medvedev in the semifinal, the whole paradigm would have shifted. The whole equation would have been different. But it is what it is. And I just felt that fatigue was just a very real factor watching Novak.
I agree with you, Amy. Look, Novak played the second semi on Friday night. He had a 5-setter, and even though he won that fifth set handily, it was still a long match against a fairly physical opponent. And Medvedev played earlier in the day, mildly challenged in the second set, but won that in straight sets. So he just that one alone, to say nothing of the days leading up. And then Medvedev, whether smelling it or just feeling relaxed, because now this was his third slam final since he'd been in a couple before, he was on fire. I mean, Medvedev, particularly that first set and a half, 2 sets, he couldn't miss. I mean, the serve, which is really good, the backhand, which you know is good, and then the forehand. That was kind of the X factor shot for Medvedev, is if he's going to have the forehand not just under control, but doing things with it. And he was lacerating it. I mean, hitting topspin and then drives and some inside out, and then running down some of the drop shots. And when you've got Novak going to fairly not frequent but more frequent serve volley points, you've got him in a tough place.
Yeah, he certainly didn't feel comfortable winning the baseline rallies, and the stats in the long baseline rallies were very lopsided in favor of Medvedev. I almost worried that Daniil was going to come into the match undercooked, and that's kind of what happened in Australia earlier this year. It was the same thing. Novak had played way more tennis, and Medvedev had completely ripped through the draw. And then Djokovic beat Daniil, obviously, in the 3-setter. So it was kind of a similar situation last year, although Djokovic had the 3-set, or was it 4 against Karatsev, I think, or did he beat him in straights, one or the other?
Much less physical than the Zverev semi. And Novak, despite the Taylor Fritz 5-setter, I think Novak much more in his comfort zone. And also remember the early part of the year, the fresh February in this case, of the Australian, which is different than kind of the late August, September. Like it's been a long go of it. And here are 27 prior slam matches, and here's the whole thing, and there's Rod Laver, and and you're right, that's a unique set of circumstances.
I thought that Medvedev had done his homework. And there was a report that Medvedev was working on defending certain short angle cross court patterns. Like if Djokovic were to use a short angle forehand cross court, Medvedev this morning actually was just working on defending that over and over and over again. And that he arrived at the tennis center 5.5 hours before the match to drill and work. And he didn't even need to defend that, because I don't recall a ton of short angle forehand cross court. So that tells me that the person who gave that report has observed one piece of what he had been working on, and that he had done his homework top to bottom, probably learning a lot from that drubbing in the Australian Open.
I also, though, don't think it was very, very tactical on the court here because, like, for example, Medvedev and Amy, you noticed this on Twitter, night and day difference between what Medvedev got out of his first serve in this match versus in Australia. At the Australian Open, Novak was simply getting the first serve back. And today he was not. And Daniil's first serve was doing massive damage. You know, that kind of thing, I almost think Daniil served better and Novak didn't have the spring in his legs to get those returns back.
Mm-hmm.
Or return them effectively also. And then so the tactic might have been the variety of the serve, but more importantly, your point is it was the execution of the serve. Because there were points where Medvedev was serving to every which way, but then you're right, the Djokovic return at times wasn't as effective, either getting in play for one, or doing something productive with it, which was going to get him to some degree in control of the point. But yeah, so Medvedev was just dictating left and right. I mean, my God, so many rallies, so much depth and everything.
There was that one pivotal, this is where I thought the entire match turned. Although, you know, one could argue that it was destined just because of the way that Novak came out. But it was in the second set. Medvedev was serving 1-2. Novak had a break point, and there was like music or something, and the chair umpire had to call a let. And Daniil got first serve again. Well, he missed his first serve, but he did nothing with his second serve. I mean, it might have been in the 70s or something. And then Novak did nothing with the return. And, you know, there was maybe I'm confusing the two different break chances, but in that game, 1-2 in the second set, there were a couple of break chances that Novak just couldn't convert.
Yeah, that really was pivotal. You're right. And it's 2-2, and then that eventually wins the set. Yeah, and that's the little window. That's the classic window for the person who loses the first set to redirect and take charge. And he didn't. And there was a whole sense through the whole match of Novak. Okay, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? You're not quite. And at the same time, big credit for Medvedev. He's like impregnable. He was doing some of the things that Novak usually does, where he was so airtight. The backhand was fantastic. In the cross courts, kind of the C to C or D to D rallies off the backhand, which Novak usually, that's a real launching pad for Djokovic, is the cross court backhand, to do things again and again, and that eventually gives him the chance to drive it down the line or get something that he gets hacked with his forehand. And he didn't do that much today because Medvedev was doing that.
I think that's why. I mean, the Australian Open final kind of clouds this reality that this has been a really difficult matchup for Novak. I think with Medvedev, he completely transformed himself in 2019. So when I look at a Medvedev head-to-head record, I kind of like to start it there. Just like with Novak, I like to start a head-to-head in 2011 because that's when he became Novak. The head-to-head since 2019 is 3-3. It was 5-3 overall, but it was 3-3. And I think one of the massive reasons for that is exactly the backhand to backhand dynamic there, where you're so right. It's like, what percent of players on tour does Novak fancy himself just hitting backhands with? Right-handers.
9.9. I mean, in other words, for example, you see the guys he plays. First of all, not that they're that many. All of the one-handers, if they're not, they're limited to like 2 or 3 cross courts, and they better do something, because they don't, they're just going to be at the other end of the seesaw. That's not going to work. And then the two-handers, I mean, I think Nishikori's got a great backhand. Goffin was good, but these guys are all like children of a lesser Novak. But Medvedev, he's just something, he's got that kind of whippiness to it, and he can take it down the line. And then his court positioning, I mean, it really is interesting. I mean, I always razz you about it, Gail, because of how you learn to play way back behind the court to return and then get in the rally and then move. It's like, what is going on here? So Novak's, I think, where's my port of entry here? How do I get in on this guy? And then Novak's forehand, again, I think the legs and the other thing just not really cooperating.
I felt that also the finishing was a problem for Djokovic, a big problem. And that also goes back to how great a counterpuncher Medvedev is. Because and that's where he looked tight. Like I agree that he looked totally tired. And I thought on the return and when he had to defend, that was evident. But then sometimes it's okay, it's a Daniil hits a poor drop shot or something. And we saw a lot of that. Medvedev hits a bad drop shot and Novak can't finish in tight. Um, and we saw Djokovic lose a lot of points trying to approach the net, maybe forcing it a little bit. But all of these things is just he was too tight to execute, and it needs to be great against Daniil because he's such a good counter puncher. If it's not great, it's not going to be good enough against him, right?
Well, you look how well Novak played in that Australian final, how much he patrolled the courts and how he was on things. In this case, yeah, he comes in to run down the drop shot. He doesn't quite do enough. And then there are a few key points that he missed where he was wide. And that is that mix of legs plus nerves. I mean, yeah, it was kind of jarring because you're so used to seeing Novak take care of those points, take care of that stuff, and pretty much clamp that down. It's like, you're not going to get away with that against me. You're not going to get away against this. And pretty soon he's in control of the court. But he didn't do that. And then a few times he tried to, okay, I'm going to hit bigger. But again, Medvedev, he just absorbs the ball and flings it back and gets to the point.
I have a more Medvedev-centric topic, if that's all right.
Yes. Yeah.
So since 2017, our three, Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, have been airtight at the majors. And I know it's diminished a little bit. Federer went away a little bit after 2018, and then Nadal went away a little bit this year at the majors, besides at Roland Garros. But there hadn't been a younger player beating any of them in a final. It just hasn't really happened until today. And Medvedev has finally done it. And it didn't matter how many Masters 1000s they won or anything. It was always, well, they didn't do it in a major, and he is the first to do it. So what does this mean, Amy?
Well, for Medvedev and maybe others like him, the thing that people were starting to hang their hat on was the best of five thing, because they were like, yeah, well, sure, Novak can be beaten in a best of three, but the best of five, that's where this guy brings it. And the knock on Medvedev is that he just really hadn't won that many best of five matches in his career. I mean, not best of five set matches, I should say, matches that are stretched for the duration. And I was thinking of some of the when Medvedev won the first two sets, I was thinking of some of the best of three, best of five debates and arguments, and wondering what the outcome would be. And Daniil had to dig hard and prove that he can hang with Djokovic. He can beat him in a best of five. And that sort of element that Djokovic is impregnable in this format has been taken away, at least at this slam on this surface.
Well, and the other thing with Medvedev, I mean, look, he's put himself in this pole position for a couple of years. I mean, he's demonstrated some significant results through 2019 and 20, and he's accumulated those building blocks. He's won Masters Series events. He's done well at all of them. He won the London tournament. So it's not like he came out of the blue and suddenly did this. Where's this guy been? So in a way, he'd established himself. He was a second seed, so he'd established himself as what it means. Wow, I think it means I hope what happens to Dominic Thiem will not happen to him. I mean, that's the thing. I was kind of jolted by that, because that Thiem, a little older, had his track going of clay results and a couple of other slam finals and beating Federer in Indian Wells. So now, but Thiem has had a really tough year by his own admission. And I hope Medvedev, and it's tempting to say, well, it sure seems that he's fresh and he's good and he's got a different kind of game. He's got a 200 backhand and who knows? So look, we know that the big three, it's that it's pretty tough to think of them as the lock. It's interesting. If you look at it slam by slam, you've got to still think Novak's got to be the guy in Australia. Rafa and Roland Garros, maybe then. It's interesting. And then Wimbledon and the U.S. Open.
Wimbledon, nobody has any track record or results at Wimbledon.
The 40-year-old guy in Switzerland does, but we don't know. Yeah, but
I mean, the really interesting one now is going to be Australia because they're all tied at 20. And is this the one where Novak pulls ahead and does 21? Or is this such a gut punch that he's going to need some time, even more time, to get over it?
Oh no, I think he's right on the horse. I think he knows that he had an incredible year. He won 3 majors. He got zoned. Got a guy played a career match to beat him in this, and then he gets his. He's probably got an incredible regimen of whether it's going to be what the rest of the year's competition like, and then organize himself, and then get to Australia, be in his happy space, his happy place, Australia.
So you're predicting that he'll pick up 21 then?
No. I predict that if anyone's going to win 21 there, it's far more likely to be Novak than the other two. I have a hard time. I feel, so I'm going to try to nuance this because I don't like making predictions. I have a hard time envisioning Roger Federer doing in 22 in Australia what he did in 2017 in Australia.
But what about the other factor, which is someone who isn't one of the 3 of them?
Well, I would say that's more plausible than, right. That's right. Medvedev riding the wave. Like Medvedev says, hey, I got to the finals in 21. I won the US Open. I've won London. Let's go. I'm going to topple you. Novak. And I'm going to take you down in Australia. That's right.
Medvedev's the number 2 threat, I think. I can't believe we're skipping ahead here, but I guess we are.
Yeah.
Medvedev it won't be Nadal going into the tournament. Now, it could end up being him because we're not future predictors. But right now, you'd have to think, like, Daniil Medvedev has won every single big title on a hard court except Miami and Indian Wells and the Australian Open. It really does feel that way.
Yeah, just those 3. He's only missing those 3.
What else is there?
No, it's true.
I know, but anyway, here's this.
Those are the big ones, though, Gil. Like those are
but there are. Wait a second. He's won Canada. He's won Cincinnati. He's won the U.S. Open. He's won Shanghai. He's won the ATP Finals. These are a lot of tournaments.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
But I said
Paris Masters. No.
He won Paris.
He did.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I fancy Medvedev more in Australia than I do Federer and Nadal. That's kind of way I would look at it.
Yeah, I mean, we're not really talking about Federer and Nadal right now. We're just, my point was, is Novak going to be his typical fresh as a daisy when he comes to Australia, or is he still going to be feeling the effects of this, which could, put a Medvedev in a better position? It was just a thought. It's not a prediction. It's just a thought.
He's too fit. And he's too still closer to a prime stage of his career than our other 2. I think, for example, the hit that Federer took for that 2019 Wimbledon final, emotionally, physically, tennis clockwise, that was a bigger thing. And ditto in a different way, Nadal at Roland Garros this year. I mean, those losses hit those guys because of where they're at physically and their wear and tear. Novak, I mean, this was obviously a tough result, but it's hard to believe he won't be physically fresh and ready by Melbourne.
I think he turns the page. And for me, the biggest thing for him is motivation. And as long as it's 2020, I'm really not worried about Novak Djokovic. Once he hits 21, he might need to mentally reset and think about what's next and how he can get himself up and get himself going. That could be a challenge for him. I'm not sure. We'd have to see. But as long as it's 2020, I think he's guns a-blazing. And the real question is he going to keep playing this year? I think that's a question. Are we going to have post-US Open without the big 3?
Well, we got 2 of them missing. So the question is, I think Novak will play some more this year. I think
so. We got Indian Wells, which is an odd time on the calendar. I mean, really weird, right? Like after all the slams, and then Indian Wells. What's weird to think is that it's going to happen again very soon after it happens. And so it's like, wow, do I really need to play Indian Wells twice in just a few months in this span?
But the tour, you know, the tour itself, to have Indian Wells without any of the big three there would be a little tough for the tour, trying to generate its traction, even though these guys could do whatever they want and they've earned the right to make those choices. So Novak, does he start to look at his schedule? And I'm not sure. I forgot to check Novak and Laver Cup.
No.
So no Laver Cup. So I could see Novak going in Indian Wells, one, maybe Paris, maybe, and then London. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how he feels. I think, yeah. I mean, he's got enough time between now and Indian Wells to chill on that.
One thing I wanted to hit on earlier was just the arms race between Medvedev, Tsitsipas, and Zverev primarily. There are some auxiliary figures like Shapovalov and Rublev and Berrettini. But I feel like they were very competitive with each other of who is going to break through and win the first major. And I'm very interested to see how all of them respond, not only Medvedev. I'm interested to see how the others respond to that happening.
I think Medvedev, though, look, he's now been in 3 finals. He got to 2 this year. Stefanos, I don't think Tsitsipas has done himself a lot of favors in recent weeks with his, he's created a lot more noise around himself than he had hoped, that I think he'd hoped to. And then it starts to make you wonder about the game and the competitive temper. Medvedev is like, look at this guy. And Zverev, for all the stuff that's around him, he's played some good tennis. He's played some good tennis through this summer.
Yeah, those guys, in addition to Berrettini, I mean, you have to put him up there. Those 4, I think, are the prime candidates to be the guys that we're talking about in future shows.
Wait, are you jettisoning Dominic Thiem? Are you think it's going to? You think it's going to continue in 22?
The way I have a very strong opinion about Thiem, and that is that he played way, way, way too much tennis for a period of about 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
And I think because of that, his future is a question mark, but I'm certainly pulling for him. And I hope that Medvedev and the others, particularly Zverev, really look hard at what he did and the calendar, and think about how the big 3 have managed their schedules appropriately, and give that a lot of thought.
That's a really good thought. And if I may just draw an American sporting term, do you think that Thiem is a little bit like one of these baseball pitchers who threw a lot of innings early, and that may have left a malingering kind of effect that obviously hit him this year, and kind of, it's going to be tricky for him to kind of recalibrate himself and then be back in the mix again. I hope that's not the case, because I like him a lot, but it's sure this year he was pretty much out of it this year. And then those other guys have been making progress. So the problem in tennis is you can't stand still, because then there's some other people like look how Berrettini has vaulted up this year. And how much better he's going to get. I think Berrettini, I like his attitude. I like his competitive and emotional attitude. And then it's a question for him. It's a backhand question.
And yeah, he lacks movement also that everyone else kind of has.
Right.
And I think I know the show's not about Berrettini, but since I saw him and I had good courtside seats, I saw him play Djokovic. Even on the forehand, I think there's a question of efficiency and energy, because Novak is just so clear, was so much more efficient in his kinetic chain. and Novak was not having to work nearly as hard shot for shot as Berrettini was. So I think believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying this. Please don't get mad at me, anyone. But I think Berrettini needs to look hard at his technique on several of his strokes.
We won't get mad at you. I think that's great. I think that's really interesting. And what I think is also interesting, when you look at the evolution of the big three, they surfaced at this era where the surfaces became more homogeneous and 32 seeds, and they rode that wave, and then they were great, and they got better and better, and they've dominated. I think moving forward, it's hard to imagine, of course, I said this before, even with Pete Sampras, it's hard to imagine three guys so taking up the goodies. And you look at these contenders, Zverev, Medvedev, Tsitsipas, Berrettini, different styles, different ways of trying to take, of going beyond the big three to something different. And that's pretty neat, and that's exciting. So I think we could be seeing in the course of the decade of the 20s, some multiple styles attempting to impose themselves on the game, whereas the organic ascent of the three in the 32 seed homogeneous surface era kind of occurred, kind of is this convergence of things. But now it won't be converging because people are building different styles. I mean, look at all these, look at those four, of how differently they all play from one another. And that could be really exciting for tennis from a style. The same thing that kind of occurred for different reasons in the women's game. The women's game is filled with stylistic diversity, and that's a really exciting thing, and that makes watching tennis really fun. To me, tennis is most fun when you have when you see a match and you see different rallies. What I remember seeing a match once, and I saw within about 10 minutes, every rally is pretty much going to go like this, and then that's when it becomes boring. But when you see different, like I want to see Berrettini and Stefanos play one another. That's exciting.
Yeah, I would just throw out a caution. I agree with everything that you just said, Joel. It's easy to ignore the younger generation and focus on the more ready generation. But in 2 years, it's not a guarantee. Like Berrettini is not just competing with the people that are his age, like Tsitsipas, Zverev, and Medvedev. He's going to be competing with Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner and Musetti before we know it. So just something to keep in mind.
Oh, that's exciting. So, hey, look, I was thinking Jensen Brooksby. And poor Sebastian Korda, who had to retire at this year's U.S. Open. But that's the thing about it. You think you're Berrettini and you're setting your sights towards those big three, but then you look behind you, and there's Musetti, and there's Alcaraz, and I think it's a really exciting period. And I think it speaks to some way the inspiration of excellence that these big three, with their fitness, with their dedication, with their, they've been kind of like these North Star guiding lights of excellence. And a lot of fascinating players playing well during the US Open this year.
Well, Novak took out the number one contender of that generation on grass in Berrettini at Wimbledon, took out the best clay player of that generation in Tsitsipas at Roland Garros, and then he took out the best hard court player in Medvedev in Australia. And ultimately, as we've seen today, it was just one step too far for Novak to reach, given all of the different circumstances put together. I found viewing this tournament to be incredibly, incredibly rewarding, like not only personally, but just as a objective viewer of everything that we saw and Novak's journey. And I'm very appreciative for it. I thought it was incredible. And for sure, Federer and Nadal's absence, as much as they are going to be felt in a very, very big way, the sport is going to create its own intrigue and interest always.
Agreed. Great players emerge, and this U.S. Open showed it. Yeah, I mean, I think we could see vividly at this U.S. Open life after Federer and Nadal, and some tremendous tennis.
I just was thinking about the speech that Novak gave, his concession speech, basically. And
runner-up speech.
Yeah, exactly. And he said something about, the love that he felt from the crowd. It was something that he really wanted, and it was very gratifying for him to feel that. And it made him feel, even though he lost, it made him feel like the happiest man in the world. And it was kind of, I don't know if he did this intentionally, but it reminded me of Lou Gehrig, the famous New York Yankee who suffered from that terrible disease, but he made the famous luckiest man speech. And it kind of was like a tip of the cap to that. And I thought it was incredibly gracious and hopeful, just like Gehrig's speech was hopeful. So yeah.
If I may, I like that. And let me give you another New York history moment in the history of New York and sports. And actually, I think Gehrig's was in 1939. So that way, and this is 2021. In the middle, Gehrig, of course, was beloved, and he'd been diagnosed with he had this horrible disease, and he just felt gratitude. 1978, Jimmy Connors wins the US Open. The year before, he'd stormed out. There's a very hectic end at Forest Hills, and he didn't go to the awards ceremony, and he was fairly reviled. And he wins in 78, and he says, I'm paraphrasing, he says, whether you like me or not, I like you. And from then on, nice. Connors never had the crowd in his hands. There's this whole little art form of what New York crowds are and how you engender with them. It's really not that hard. They want, they like underdogs, but it doesn't mean they want them to win. I mean, if that match today goes into a fifth set or something, that is all Novak.
Yep.
That is like cheering them on because they want to see it and they want to see the guy be the top of the heap and all of the above. But it's nice, these moments. And it was nice to see Novak engage with it. That's, each slam has its own factor. And while the crowds are big at all of them, I think none of the slams does the crowd have more that player-crowd connection throughout than the US Open because of its whole, it doesn't mean the others don't have legitimate crowds. It's just, it means a lot, the whole New York vibe, all the end of the year, all of that.
I too thought it was very poetic in its own way, despite Novak losing the match, kind of winning the crowd. Not that, look, it's not a good consolation. And obviously he could have won the crowd and the match, but it's still, everything had me feeling as we started the show. I feel like appreciative of everything that we've seen this year in 2021 out of Novak Djokovic. That'll do it for this episode of 3. Remember, we're available on all podcast platforms. We greatly appreciate it if you leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. We will see you next time on the next episode of 3.